Stillicum, and there was a grocery store that you could see from here. It was called Terrell's Store. It's now the little church on the Prairie. And George Barath had a store called the Lakeside Store. It would be at Interlochen and Washington Boulevard. That is long gone, and there's apartments there now. One gentleman I knew had a little grocery store he was running temporarily in Lake City. It was between other business opportunities, just running for a short time. On occasion, a friend of mine came up from Portland. He'd just gotten himself a Model A Roadster and given it his first drive. I didn't have a car at the time, but he called me up and he says, "Hey," he says, "can you line up a couple of girls and we'll go out and go to a show or something?" I says, "Geez, I don't know, I guess so." It was a girl that I'd known slightly from school. And it was the daughter that told the friend this little store in Lake City. So I called her up and asked her if she could get a friend and she'd go out with me, and she said she would. And we know that girl died a few years ago. We've been married for 51 and a half years. We had, of course, no Lakewood water district in those days. The biggest supplier of water was the Tacoma Land Company, which platted the area around Stillicum and the Gravelly Lake. They had a reservoir and a pump up on top of a hill. You can see it today from Washington Boulevard. You can see the location of the reservoir. One of Lakewood's water tanks is up there. And Manly had a gravel pit up there too. I suppose that's all filled in now. But sometimes the kids go play at it. There was a few other little water systems around, but lots of people have well. In the 20s and the early 30s, there was still a lot of houses around that didn't have inside plumbing. And a well in the backyard to carry the water in the bucket. Of course, there was the usual outhouses. Come Halloween, in those days, Halloween was a great celebration for the kids, and pushing over outhouses and wood piles was a great thing, and soaping windows. I remember one time when Harry Rowan had a big grocery store later on in Lake City. Most of the produce used to come in wooden boxes in those days. Kids would grab all these boxes in the middle of the night, pile them in the middle of Veterans Drive and set them on fire. That was it. But Halloweening and tricking and treating and stuff. Tricking and treating, I was a kid.
No treats, it was all trick.
Well, one group of kids would go to the front door and say trick or treat. If they didn't get it, somebody was at the back of the house and pulled the light switch, and that was the way that worked. But I can't finish this without talking about Park Lodge. I started Park Lodge in the first grade in 1924, and I remember the first grade teacher was Miss Morris. But the school was laid out in those days. It was 8 grades, and there was 4 rooms and 2 grades in each room. And the teacher taught one grade while the other grade was supposed to be doing some kind of schoolwork or something. And under the desks, there was a shelf under the desk. The desks were all bolted to the floor, and they were a unit of seat and a desk and a seat and a desk, and all your books and tablets and stuff were kept on the shelf under the desk. I guess that was a bad thing. Now the kids all gotta wear backpacks and carry all their stuff with them. Park Lodge had a lunchroom on the west side where we carried our lunches in little tin boxes, or some of them brought them in paper sacks. I used to bring a hard-boiled egg in my lunch and used to crack it on Harry Doone's head every noon. And then there was the furnace room, and Mr. Walkley, who hand-fired the boiler. And then next to that, there was originally what they called a manual training room, where the 8th graders learned how to use saws and hammers. And then there was a big basement that we played in the wintertime when it was raining. They had a game, I don't know where it started, I never heard of it, but this game was called Pump, Pump, Pull Away, and all the kids stood at one group at each end of the basement. There was a bench, and you stood on the bench, and then at a given signal, a bunch of kids would run from one, and they'd swap ends, and the kid in the middle would try to catch somebody, and when everybody was caught, that was the end of the game. But why they called it Pump, Pump, Pull Away, but if nobody would run, the guys out in the middle would come and yell, Pump, Pump, Pull Away. If you don't come away, I'll pull you away. We had an interesting variation of baseball that we called soak out. Now, to play soak out, you had a pitcher and a batter and bases, but if the batter hit the ball, anybody who got a hold of the ball, you didn't have to catch it in the air, pick it up off the ground, or anything. You could throw it and hit the runner. We used to play soccer. We had a regular soccer field. The soccer field was up at the end of the schoolyard, up against what was now 100th Street. And one of the other games, we used to play marbles. In the spring, you play marbles. The place where the dirt was bare and smooth, make a circle. Well, I guess if I remember right, maybe 4 feet in diameter. Good sized circle. Every player put a marble in it, and then you had an agate. A real good agate would stay in the ring if you knocked somebody's marble out of it, and then you got a second shot. If your shooter went out, then it was the next guy's shot. But you had to learn to shoot marbles off of the tip of your finger and your knuckle, because if you did it with your thumb, pretty soon you wore a hole in your thumbnail, and it got very painful. So you learned to pop a marble off of your knuckle. But Park Lodge also had swings. Now, of course, today you couldn't have swings because some kid would fall out of it and they'd have a big lawsuit. But the swings were quite a thing now. Now I guess kids are supposed to sit and swing. We stood in it and hold into the chains, and we could swing those up until chains were parallel with the ground. But I was out of the country for a while with my parents. When I came back, I went into the 5th grade, and Clover Park Junior High had been built by that time. I think Clover Park must have been built 1928 or 29, something like that. 28. Yeah, that's what I thought. But there was nothing along Gravity Lake Drive between Park Lodge and Clover Park School except the visitation villa. And Mr. Woodham's house down on Chambers, down on Ponce de Leon Creek. But after Clover Park was built, a couple of fellows named Burkett and Evans built a auto repair shop across the road from Clover Park. And Walt operated, I don't know what happened to Burkett, Walt operated into the late 19 first Lakewood Fire Department occupied what was the garage building, and they added on to it, and then, of course, they got new stations, and the same building, or part of it now, is the Lakewood B&B Glass. And there was another house down about where that white real estate office that sits back off of Gravelly Lake Drive. The original house is gone, but that was Tom Rathbone's house, the teacher at Clover Park.
He was our manual training teacher.
Did you like him?
Great guy.
And then
He didn't have any control.
Lakewood Center was built in 1937. And that was the beginning of the end, you might say, of the old Lakewood. The name Lakewood was never used until, really commonly used until about 1950. Prior to that, it was known as the Lakes District, or the people downtown called it out in the sticks. The name Lakewood came, I believe, I got a copy of the plat here, in 1910. A real estate company platted the land adjacent to that went across the Prairie over to Stoughton Boulevard. And all that is what is known as Lakewood subdivision, and I believe that's where the Clap Enterprises got that name. I have a picture here taken in 1912, and you can see a real estate sign that says this is Lakewood. Now,
That's the old track.
that's the old track where they actually, Gravelly Lake Drive was part of the racetrack. But speaking of the Clap Enterprises, it was fairly common knowledge when the thing was built that the real instigator in building that was Mary Clap, Norton's first wife. But I couldn't talk about this without mentioning Charlie Mann. He had a newspaper, and he used to put things in there sometimes to stir people up. I know one time he told me he put in something to the effect of what lady banker has a severe shortage in her accounts. And he said 5 men called up and said it wasn't his wife. Well, there was no basis to the story in the first place. But on one occasion, Charlie mentioned in his paper that in the early days of Lakewood, it was populated by bums, reactionaries, and lakeshore snobs. Well, I didn't live on a lake, so there's been considerable talk about trees, but you know that most of the houses that were built on the prairie, and well, developers have cut down a lot of fir trees and oak trees, unfortunately. Everybody that bought a house built on the prairie planted trees around it. And there's really more trees on the prairie than there ever was. And speaking of the prairie, when it was just prairie, the grass used to get on fire from time to time. People go out and stamp it out with wet gunny sacks. When it really made a fire is when it got into the Scotch broom. Because the dry Scotch broom is oily and the clouds of black smoke roll in the heck of a fire. I've often heard that people thought that the kids started it just to watch the commotion, but it was kind of scary because there was no fire department. But I mentioned Scotch broom. The Scotch broom is a late comer here. It's theoretically, according to legend anyway, a Scottish sea captain